This is Kathryn Goetzke, host of the Hope Matrix podcast. We are here to share science, stories, and strategies for how to hope. I'm the Chief Hope Officer of the Shine Hope Company, and Shine is the mnemonic for how we teach hope. So when we talk about hope, we talk about how we use stress skills, happiness habits, inspired actions, nourishing networks, and eliminating challenges, which are our thinking patterns that get in the way of our ability to hope. Hope is a skill. You can measure hope, you can teach hope, and you can start practicing skills to activate higher hope in your life today. And on this Hope Matrix podcast, we aim to bring in guests, experts in science, people with stories, and those that have strategies for activating hope in your life. Well, hello, everyone. This is Kathryn Goetzke, host of the Hope Matrix podcast. Welcome to the show today. I am super grateful to have with us here Mr. Travis Davis. He has a name that I can pronounce. I'm super grateful for that off the bat. But I'm really excited to have him here. I'm meeting Travis for the first time now. We met via LinkedIn, which gotta say, thanks to LinkedIn for making so many really incredible connections and making, I think, people around the world so accessible to us to have these really important conversations. And we're going to dive into a conversation with Travis to learn more about Travis's journey, story, and how hope has played a role in specific skills and strategies that you all and the world can use to activate hope in our lives. So welcome to the show, Travis. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Yes, amazing. Well, let's dive into who is Travis. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. So I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I was born and raised here. I went to school in Southern California. I got my bachelor's in English at Azusa Pacific University, and then I got my master's at the University of New Mexico in adapted physical education. So I was born with cerebral palsy, which is a birth defect, and I also call it a physical disability, and it affects my legs. So there's three types of cerebral palsy, and the CP that I have is called spastic diplegia. So it just means that both my legs are affected. So I've had like 14 surgeries from when I was born to eighth grade. And the surgeries also included open heart surgery when I was born because I had a hole in my heart. Yeah.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I also have hydrocephalus. So for those of you who do not know what hydrocephalus is, it's basically just brain fluid that needs to, an excessive brain fluid that needs to get into like the other part of the body, but I think like the stomach. So I have what's called a VP shunt, a small, a tiny catheter that goes from my head down to the stomach, and it regulates the fluid. So the hole in the heart and the hydrocephalus was independent from the CP. So
Oh my gosh.
I had I was growing up, I would see my podiatrist, or not my podiatrist, my pediatrician. I also see a podiatrist for my legs, but pediatrician. And, he told me at one point that the doctors, some of them had just stopped operating on me because they didn't think I was going to live. So, when you talk about hope, it's
Oh
like,
my gosh.
what how much more relevant is that of not knowing if your son is going to live, and then having hope that he is, and then as someone who lives with a physical disability, I hope is intertwined to everything that I do on a daily basis.
Wow. Yeah, absolutely. Um, and that's horrible to hear about the doctors. There's a study around hope that the physician's hope for patients is sometimes more predictive of patient outcomes than the patient's hope. And so, when doctors and physicians and give up hope on patients, I mean, I know so many people that have overcome even what the doctor says through their own hope, but you think about
Mhm.
how many patients this affects because of the doctor's hope. um, getting the doctors schooled on hope and hope science and why it's so important for patient outcomes, to me, that just like hits home so deeply. Yeah. And, so how did were your parents like person? I mean, they must have been, you must have so much hope in you. You must just be like, I'm going to show, but you're tiny, right? You're a baby, or what
Mhm.
age?
Yep.
Wow. That is,
Yeah. I was
um,
born prematurely. That's one of the predictors of having cerebral palsy, or is being born prematurely. So um my birthday is April 22nd, and so that is Earth Day. I'm very grounded, and so I think that also plays into having hope. So like I'm very grounded in hope, grounded in my faith. So that I think has served me really well.
yeah, that's amazing. My aim overall is just to normalize the conversation around hopelessness, because we all experience moments of hopelessness all the time. When I got into the work, I learned I survived a suicide attempt. I lost my dad to suicide when I was 18 years old. So I set out on a mission to really figure out, why do people die by suicide? What makes some people stick around? And hope was the universal kind of reason. And hopelessness across all the studies was the single consistent predictor of suicide. And then when I broke down hopelessness and looking what that is, it's emotional despair. So you feel sadness, angry, or afraid, and it's a helplessness to do anything about it. So a powerlessness, and we all experience those moments all the time. It's really how we navigate those moments that matter. And the more moments of hopelessness we have, the more likely we are to have clinical anxiety and depression. And so the more challenges we have, the more we have to be proactive about the skills and what we do to practice and cultivate our hope, really. And so in your life, I mean, thinking of all of the challenges you have, I'm sure so many moments of hopelessness. And so how, like, I mean, yeah, exploring how you navigated those in healthy ways. And like, were you intentional about knowing you had to practice skills, or was that just in you?
I've been going to therapy since 2015. Now, I say therapy, and that's very broad because I've had physical therapy, all types of therapy. When I say therapy, mental health. And I think early on, the psychologist had identified the things that I was doing as like survival methods of like I have gotten to this point because I've had to use survival tactics, um and just because of my disability. So just like innately figuring out how to survive, to like live on my own, or just do certain things, because having a physical disability definitely can weigh on your your mental capacity to um, process how that is, on top of living like your day-to-day like life. So it's figuring out how to manage your own stress, and figuring out what having a disability looks like on top of just yeah, just your daily life activities. So I think I'm able to adapt in ways I probably wouldn't have if I wasn't disabled. And think there's that point in which you realize where the where you've kind of been at your worst or the bottom. And I think that to me was realizing how grim it was when I was born, because I don't remember it, right? So having the doctors articulate that to me, it's like, wow, that really could have just been end, but it's not. So I think, well, it's not, I don't think it's healthy for me to continue to like ruminate on that, but at least it gives me a reference to other situations where I feel hopeless, and knowing, well, I've already been through this. It may not have been through my own strength because I was just a baby, but I got through it. So I think I can have the strength to get through this.
Yeah. And that's what we know about hope, and that's why we actually write Shine Hope stories, and why we want to normalize the conversation around it. Like, we all have challenges, and I mean, so many. And so if we can write a story from a challenge we've overcome and think about the specific things and strategies we use to overcome it, then in the future, when we have other challenges, we can pull back on that and know we can do hard things. And even if you were just a baby, I mean, you had power within. I mean, you're obviously a fighter. I mean, you had to play, even though they were making decisions, you played a key role in that, so it's pretty amazing. And talking about stress. So shine is the mnemonic for how we talk about hope and how we talk about practicing and cultivating skills. And this is just based on the research I've done from around the world, secondary and primary research on hope and what it takes to cultivate hope in our lives. And stress skills are the first, because, when you think about the emotional despair of hopelessness, like, how are we managing that? We're either managing it in healthy ways. So we're either managing our sadness, anger, fear in healthy ways, or we're turning to things like addiction or self-harm, or which I did for a long time until I realized that I had to
Mm,
replace it with healthy ways.
mm.
So do you have practices, or do you have things you do to manage your stressors?
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think going to therapy weekly is really helpful for me because I get great feedback from my therapist. And then, she gives me strategies to like meditation, journaling, breath work. So these things that can have a big impact on one's mental health. So definitely that. And then learning ways in which I have distorted thinking, because that
Huge.
identifying that then allows me to be more present with my thoughts, and then it reduces my stress level.
Yeah. That's our E. That's our eliminating challenges. It's just like huge. The list is so long, of all of the ways our brain, internalizing our failures, or trying to control things outside of our controls, or negative bias, or the automatic negative thoughts, or the rumination, or the worry, kind of all of those, kind of thinking, the distorted thinking, attaching to outcomes. Like, it just drives that cycle of helplessness and hopelessness. And we then develop clinical anxiety and depression. It's just so predictable. And so it sounds like you use your stress skills to get back into the present moment, which is awesome. So you're, being proactive about that. I think that's we're not even taught as kids that this is happening. And those thought patterns control our lives for so long until we really understand, like, we have power over, we have to learn to take kind of control of them and calm them down. And, are they helping us, or are they just serving to distract us? And becoming aware, I think, is so important. So that's great. And did you just start doing them, or have you been since therapy? Did you do them as a younger kid, or?
Mm, no, I didn't know as much, and it wasn't until like 17, 18 years old that I was really interested in like psychology and personal development, to that I started reading books. And then it just became clear to me, and I had a better understanding the more that I went to therapy. And then having good therapists, and I've also had bad therapists. And so
Yeah, exactly.
I was able to put that also in practice when I had bad therapists to kind of manage my stress and anxiety. So I won't speak specifically about that,
Yeah.
but yeah, uh, more so as an adult with those strategies.
Yeah, got it. And it's so important to keep trying therapists just because you don't like the first one or 10 or you'll find it's possible to find someone. So they're all very different and we connect with therapists on different levels. So yeah, that's good that you were persistent in your pursuit. So we're growing up, I'm curious, were kids kind to you? Were they mean? I feel like kids are so mean, like, and things they don't know about or are scared of, they're just mean. And I know for me growing up, like we didn't do a good job of talking about differences and people and acceptance and love and kindness, which,
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's actually something that I've been discussing about over the past couple of weeks, coincidentally. But so I grew up going to a very small parochial school. So from kindergarten to eighth grade. And I was the only person in the whole school for those 9 years with a disability. So I had a really good support system with my friends and then people that um, I interacted with, either the grades higher or lower than me. So that was really helpful. I think another thing that was beneficial was, having my dad, he would volunteer and be at the school a bunch during lunchtime. So my friends got to know him. And, it wasn't like, well, I'm here, so don't mess with my
right.
son. But
Yeah.
because my dad doesn't have that personality, anyways. He's a very kind individual. So I think it just helped the students and my friends just learn more about me and be more comfortable. But I remember in PE we would do kickball, and I use forearm crutches usually. And obviously, if I'm kicking the ball, well, one, I'm not going to kick it very far, and then two, I'm not going to be able to run to the base without getting out. So we had a workaround, which was having one of my friends run the base after I kicked the ball. So
Oh,
that was a way in which I think at the time, now that I think about it, like empathy was being taught and put into action.
yeah.
And um and so I've been very lucky to have been like unscathed during my time. Now that's not to say I didn't have bad experiences, but um I would say for the most part it was a relatively enjoyable experience for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, yeah, really amazing. And I'm so grateful to hear that. And I think it's not the case with so many kids, like so many with disabilities feel isolated, not included. And to me, being innovative on how we think about inclusion is so
Mm,
critical. Especially when you look at violence numbers increasing. I mean, there's so much hopelessness and depression numbers, anxiety, especially in our youth. If we want to have a healthy society, that includes everyone. And so being really intentional that everyone does feel included and that we're innovative on how we include people, that we make people feel valuable and important to this world because everyone is,
mhm.
I just think it's so important, so important. So I'm glad to hear that that was, a part of your experience growing up. And I think I wish we'd done more work of that in my community on, so and there was a lot. I mean, we had a lot of diversity and stuff, but I don't remember that specifically being a part of it from the disability standpoint. And I think that's so incredibly important. So um Amazing. I'm curious, what's your life like now? Like, what are you doing? How is life? You're living on your own, I'm assuming. You have a
Um,
podcast, I
yes.
know.
So
Yeah.
I have a podcast called Off the Crutch where I share my experiences living with cerebral palsy, but then also interviewing people in the disability community. And, when I started it 4 years ago, it was just something to do because of COVID and the lockdown. And as I've gotten more um, back into it, this idea of identifying what our crutch is has really fascinated me because, when you think of crutches, we think of, mobility aids or something that we use for a short amount of time. And it's like we have to work to get off our crutches. But for myself, who needs them, for the majority of the time that I am walking, that's something that I use. But then also from a figurative standpoint of, what are the mental crutches that we
Mhm.
have that are not allowing us to get past, from point A to point B. So, being on this podcast and, learning more about your work, I think is very parallel to these ideas that I've been wrestling with on my own journey, and like, how can I help other people like you're helping others through this lens of hope, but how can I help people through my lens of disability, and then also identifying what crutches people may have, because I think when we identify those roadblocks and then figuring out a path to move forward, then that does provide somebody with hope. Like that does provide a path through. So, I think this conversation is very timely and again, parallel to the work that you're doing. So, the podcast is something that I've been focusing on, and between that and just doing work around disability awareness, talking to companies, helping them become more inclusive. I recently helped get a Aussie bowl and smoothie shop off the ground that employs people with disabilities. And so that was a really great experience for me to work with my two friends who are the franchise owners. Their daughter has a 4 year their daughter is 4 with Down syndrome. And so, their mission to provide more employment opportunities for people with disabilities really
Mhm.
resonated with me. So being able, as someone with an entrepreneurial spirit, to help in that manner and get that off the ground was really, gratifying for me.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great. It's so important. So good to hear that you're working on that. So it's good to know for people listening that if you want Travis, how can people can find you on LinkedIn, Travis Davis?
People,
Do you have a
yep.
website?
Yes. So
Yeah.
people can find me on LinkedIn, or they could go to travisdavis.net, .net, not .com, or they can email me at travis@travisdavis.net. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of and accessible.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so to the happiness habits. So what do you do for dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin? How do you get them in your life? Like,
I think working out has been really an important role to get those types of good feelings in my body. And then obviously drinking a lot of water, eating the foods that I need to, and then having like positive thoughts, because I think it can be, as I mentioned before, you have something that you live with that you didn't ask for. Um it it can be very daunting and then like very heavy. So thinking um good thoughts, having just positive influences in your life. But I definitely enjoy, working out. I grew up playing wheelchair basketball, so
Oh,
adaptive
wow.
sports is something that has been a big part of my life. And then coaching wheelchair basketball too was something that I really enjoyed. So, thinking about the types of wellness opportunities out there for individuals with disabilities are, more so now, but back, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years, maybe few and far between. So
Yeah.
being able to talk and like mentor kids with physical disabilities has been um, something that I've enjoyed doing in the past because, I told them that that's a good way for them to feel better about themselves. And so it's like when you have that foundation, as I'm sure you're well aware of, when you have like that foundation of happiness and hope, then you feel like you can do more things. You have more confidence. And so it's like confidence for, employment or whatever it may be. So you're just like stacking to get to your goals.
Yeah. Yeah. And achieving goals, even tiny goals, releases dopamine. So it's like great to set goals that are achievable, that you can actually kind of accomplish, that starting with very little ones, even if it's just, whatever it is for whatever capacity. How do you find out about, like, for people with disabilities, how do they find places of recreation? Or,
Mm,
I mean,
yeah, that's great. Depending on where you live, there might be more opportunities than others, but doing a Google search on adaptive recreation or adaptive PE. I mean, adaptive PE is usually in all of the public schools. I'm assuming Chicago because we have it here, and Chicago is a lot larger than Albuquerque. But yeah, I'd say inclusive recreation, adaptive sports, something of that nature will bring up those either programs or different apps that are out there. Now, I know that there's other apps that people that I know with disabilities have created. So you could do exercises at home, and it's really helpful for people who don't have access or live in more remote areas where those programs don't exist.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, very smart. And we know that exercise releases endorphins, and there's plenty of studies that show they're as effective as antidepressants, if not more so. So, yeah, really important and again, the more challenges you have, the more stress hormones you have, and then so the more happiness hormones you need to figure out how to get. And so being intentional about that and innovative on how you get them is really critical. Um, so we talked about a little inspired action, setting goals. Do you have goals? Do you set goals? Like, what's your
Mm.
life like around goals?
Yeah, I just completed a goal. I
Yeah,
yeah, I know, right?
awesome.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I just got back from an 8-day trip to Austin,
Awesome.
Texas. So it's
Uh,
the first time that I had visited, and I went. So I've lived in other places before, so that is nothing new to me. But to go to a new place by myself in my wheelchair. So the reason I specify that is, I have forearm crutches, but for longer distances, I will use a wheelchair, and it can be very challenging to navigate like a city in a wheelchair, as other folks who might be listening who use wheelchairs will know. So trying to figure out like, what am I going to take, how much am I going to take, figuring all that out was a challenge. And then when I got there, it's like, okay, now that I'm here, how like how am I going to navigate everything? And, I would say, like, I was surprised how smooth everything went because nothing got broken. I was able to get in and out of the Ubers. I was just
wow.
hoping that I wouldn't like go over a crack on a sidewalk and then break my, wheel, because that's happened. I'm sure that's also happened to strollers too. So, wheelchairs are not just you know um the culprit of that, but um so I had a goal that I wanted to go there.
Mhm.
And I came back with more confidence and like desire to do more traveling on my own. And then, as far as something that I have yet to accomplish that is in the pipeline, it's like I want to work on well, I am working on a children's book for my niece who's 2 years old. And as I mentioned, I've been an educator and in the schools. And what I've noticed early on, at least at like the middle school age, that students were very curious about my disability, but they also were afraid to ask questions. And
Yes.
so having that conversation with them was opened my eyes to this whole world of like, wow, there must be other students like them who feel the same way. So that gave me the inspiration for my TEDx talk that I gave on social inclusion in education, which allowed me to have more speaking opportunities and whatnot. But when my niece was born, I realized that I was going to be the first person that she was going to have any experience with in regards to disability.
Mhm.
And she loves to read. I get pictures all the time of her just like reading books. And
Aw.
so, that's what I'm working on. And hopefully we can finish that up at the end of the year. And so, that's what I'm working on now and what I just recently accomplished going to Austin.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. That's wonderful. And that's exactly what I was talking about. I mean, I think we're curious and we don't know. And if we're at all scared to do something, that can come out as like anger or making fun or whatever. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
why? Like, we need to open the conversation and be able to ask questions and be curious and do it in the right way. So I love that you're doing that. And I can't wait to read that. So you'll have to let me know. Back to your trip. So, how much did you pack?
So I actually decided to pack for half the amount of time because bringing two luggages or more than I could actually carry with my chair didn't
Yeah.
seem very practical to me.
Yeah.
So I also researched, the hotel and whether they had laundry service. So I'm just like, okay, perfect. I'm
Nice.
just going to pack for half. And then halfway there, I'm going to do laundry. And, it's going to be great. And that's what happened. That's what I did. And it was the first time that I've actually been on a trip where everything went right. I did not, and if something did go wrong, I didn't I didn't even it didn't even affect me because yeah, I didn't have any issues. Yeah.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you planned ahead of time and you thought through challenges you would have and how you would navigate them and so you prepared well for it too. So, and there's another study on hope that if you do that, you think about a goal and you think about the challenges you might have along the way and you problem solve for it before you even go after the goal, even if you have other challenges unrelated, you still are better able to navigate them and reach the goal. So you're just living proof of that. That's
Oh,
awesome.
thank you.
Yeah. Um, Super cool. And then the N, nourishing networks. And you've talked about, you have a really strong group of friends, talked about your
Hmm.
family. Who else is a part of your therapist? Who else is important in your network?
Mm, I think you touched on all of that. I will say that the folks that I connect with for my podcast have
Hmm.
been like really awesome.
Hmm.
And even just the friendships that I've made from those conversations and meeting them through LinkedIn or social media has
Mm-hmm.
really added the value to my life, and I'm just really appreciative of that.
Yeah. Say the name of your podcast again?
Off the
Off,
crutch.
Off the Crutch. Awesome, by Travis Davis. Um, yeah, that's amazing. What kind of advice? So say you have a disability and kids are bullying you, or you feel isolated or alone. What can you do? What recommendations do you have, especially for youth?
Mm. My first thought would be go to a teacher, but I don't know how much, the assumption is that teachers and administrators have this like level of understanding about bullying and how to de-escalate the situation, but how much knowledge do they have about disabilities? How much knowledge do they have about disabilities and like bullying? And I don't know the answer to that, but I also don't know if it's as black and white as, hey, stop, it's not nice to make fun of somebody who looks different. Like, I don't know if you de-escalate the situation in that way. I think having other people you can identify with. So when I was playing wheelchair basketball, that was the first time, it was like 12 years old, the first time that I I actually met somebody with a disability. So I went through like 12 years of like not knowing anybody with a disability. It was just
Wow.
me. And
Wow.
so that was, eye opening as well. And, my coach, he had polio. So he was somebody that I could identify with. Like he didn't have CP, but he had a disability.
Right.
So
Yeah.
I think I would first reach out to people that you can identify with and see if there's either a special education teacher, if there's an adaptive sport or recreation organization that you can connect with,
Mm-hmm.
um, and just get. Um, I would go in those avenues, or even reach out to people that may give those types of talks.
Yeah.
So I think that
It's a
it's
great idea.
if it's happening to one person, then it's also more than likely happening in another multiple people. So instead of like how I got to the point where I gave a talk to the whole entire middle school back then was because somebody had brought it up into a classroom class that I was teaching, and so I had stopped and talked to them about my disability, and that was like 20 students. But then I realized that it probably went beyond 20 students. So if bullying is happening to one student, it's more than likely happening to more. So we need to reach more people with this understanding of, hey, what you're doing, bullying and not having empathy, is not conducive to you. And it's also not conducive to the person that you are traumatizing or having those conversations with, because at a certain point, that individual will start to lose hope. And that's not what we want.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and we know the bullies are very hopeless too,
Yes.
so
Mm-hmm.
it comes from a hopeless place and then it just creates more hopelessness. So yeah, that's great. So having someone in to speak, really important, normalizing it, finding people around that are like you. I would also say like keep searching for to try,
Mm-hmm.
adults, like keep like, adults are flawed as well, and you
Yes.
won't not kind so don't give up on finding someone trusted. It's so important that we have trusted adults in our lives. And for kids that have gone through trauma or feel it's and yet we know it's so critical. So there's, some of our teachers have said less than half of the kids in their classroom can identify one trusted adult in their life. And so, and that's just, it's so sad from a societal standpoint. And so, Yeah, it's really important. What can we do to be more inclusive? Do you think what would you like to see in the world?
Um, well, I would say maybe selfishly, that's what I enjoy doing is talking to organizations, talking to schools to bring that message of, here's my story and here's how I can help your school or your students. So, I am, whether it's with you on this podcast or friends that I know, I've always said that I'm here to be a resource to just help other people. And I think my friends and people that know me know that about me, that I'm very generous with what I enjoy doing in that way. But I think having more more conversations on like what is a disability, like how are we incorporating inclusiveness in our classrooms. No, I enjoy talking to the private schools more so than the
Mm,
public. Enjoys maybe not the best word. The differences that I've seen is that unlike the private schools, public schools have like special education programs. So they'll have like best buddies or more of, they'll have the population of individuals with disabilities, where so in the private schools, they don't. So that's where I think I'm able to go in and be somebody that they've maybe never seen before. And that
mm,
also helps them not um, feel like they maybe act out in sort of bullying tendencies. But
yeah.
um, I think having more like teachers need more professional development. That's not what I'm advocating for,
But
but
they
I
do.
think
I
I
mean, no,
think
I'm just kidding,
but
teachers.
yeah,
We love you.
but I think those conversations are helpful to you know to not segment the students of like, here are all the people that are in special education or have these disabilities, like have more integration, reach out
Yes.
to outside organizations like Best Buddies,
Love
Special
that.
Olympics, adaptive sport organizations. Trying to think of any others off the top of my head, but yeah, outside organizations, bringing them in, like people have brought me in from the outside. So um, I I think that's a really good way to go.
Yeah, I love that. Like creative integration, you
Mm-hmm.
know? Yeah, I love it. That's so good. And yeah, having the conversations around it, having an open, curious kind of school environment. I mean, in our Shine mnemonic, we have under the nourishing networks, like the research on kindness, compassion, empathy is all so clear on why it's so important for our health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And we have links to a ton of those studies. So it's important that we cultivate this in our children, and those are great suggestions and ideas for how to do so. Yeah, amazing. And we already kind of went through the eliminating challenges, which are our negative thought patterns that get in the way of our ability to hope, which is our mind is sometimes our biggest challenge. Of all. And you talked about those stress skills. Are there anything else that you want to add to that? Do you like controlling things outside of our control? Has that been a big issue for you?
Yeah. Oh yeah,
I mean,
100%. Especially with the Austin trip, I go back to it again, but um I think the whole time I was just like, I'm gonna go with it, and I released any control that I had for 8 days. And then I came back home. I'm like, okay, I'm back in control of everything now. But yeah, for those
uh,
8 days, I'm like, I'm just gonna go with it. I'm gonna be patient. I'm going to just roll with the punches, and that served me well. I think that added to how much I enjoyed the city so much.
Mm, yeah. What a great trip and amazing. Yeah. And that you were intentional about it too. So were
Hmm.
kind of aware of it. And the more fear we have, the more, the more we want to control. That's just such a ingrained kind of mechanism. So like understanding that and learning how to like what is within my control in this trip and what can't I control and how can I just kind of allow for that. Before we got on, you talked a little bit about your faith. How does that play a role in all of this for your hope?
Mm, well, I grew up Catholic, and I think that it, it serves me because as I like learned about my faith in God growing up in parochial school, having like the understanding, and I'm just talking from like a faith perspective, so individuals listening who may not share the same values, this may not resonate with them, and that is totally
Mm,
fine. But feeling that I was I'm here for a purpose, and that God allowed me to be alive even though doctors gave up on me, I think is very powerful.
mm,
So, I feel like, my disability is the cross that I bear, but it's also because I can't hide my disability. So, wherever I go, people know. And so that sometimes gives them the invitation to help me. Like yesterday, I was leaving a restaurant after dessert. And as I was walking out, somebody got out of their seat and just went to the door and opened it up for me. And, you know, that actually happens quite a bit, for whatever reason. But and I'm very grateful. Like I have no problems with people helping me, but I think that just speaks to people's empathy and their desires to just just be very kind. But I definitely feel like having the faith allows me to set goals, to have hope, and to really move forward.
yeah. So do you like it when people ask you about it and help you in the street or whatever? Or does that?
Mm, um, I got that question the other day when I was guest lecturing um for a class. And yeah, my response was, and for this too, I think it comes with the territory. So like I didn't ask for this life, but at the same time, like I'm not going to go out of my way not to acknowledge it. And I think that, um, when big people have their jobs, right, from like 8 to 5, and then they're just like off call, like they're done after 5 o'clock. Like you can't reach me. Like I'm done until the next day. Like I feel like I'm on call all the time. So I'll go anywhere, and I'm just, somebody has a conversation with me, like, we could have that conversation. So I have gotten used to it. I Some days are better than others where I'm just like, I like, do I want to engage right now? Or how do I want to approach it? But
Yeah.
yeah, it comes with the territory. And if it's not me, then who else is gonna give them that knowledge and have that conversation with them?
Uh-huh. Yeah. Got it. Amazing. Is there anything else that you want any of our listeners to know or any information you want to share? Again, Travis Davis dot net.
Net. Net. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Travis Davis dot.
TravisDavis.net. Like, um, no, I would just say that, whether you have a disability or not, and if you're going through a difficult time, there are techniques, there are people, and, it, as much as I'm sure it's cliche to say, like, it does get better. And everybody has the strength inside of them to
Mm,
reach their goals and their potential. And, you
yes.
know, I wouldn't be where I am without that and having that understanding. And, take
Yeah.
it from somebody who have maybe not have been alive and be here right now. Like I use that as motivation and to push forward. So if you were to like believe anybody, but believe me that it's,
I
you can
know.
be, definitely be hopeful and get to where you want to be.
Yeah, walking miracle, Travis. Yeah, that's amazing. And it's a process. I kind of think I solve it, then I go back down, and then I solve it
Mm,
again.
yeah.
Hope for me is an ongoing arm wrestle with hope, but it's like a muscle, and you get better at it. I think with time and practice and learning from others that have gone
Yep.
through similar experiences. How do they navigate it? How can I navigate it more easily? So I maybe don't suffer as much, but I'm also very I'm very independent. And so,
Hmm.
I like to learn things for myself, sometimes the hard way. So, but yeah, it's been such an honor to get to know you and to meet you. I'm so grateful to you for taking the time to share with me and our listeners kind of some strategies that they can potentially incorporate in their own life or the lives of others, or ways to be kinder and more compassionate humans and more open and inclusive. I think it's so important, right now, more so than ever. So you sharing your story really helps kind of achieve that. So thank you so much, Travis Davis.
Of
Um,
course.
and thank you all the listeners for listening in. Please do share this with others, spread the message. Hope is measurable and teachable, and we have to practice and cultivate skills to become more hopeful. And, as we talked about, we learn from other people, and other people's stories. And so I'm really grateful to Travis for sharing his today here on this podcast. So have a wonderful day. Thanks so much. And don't forget to keep shining.
Thank you.
So, thank you all for listening in to the Hope Matrix podcast. We want to shine a light that hope is teachable, hope is measurable and teachable, and provide you with actionable insights for how you can start activating hope in your life today, and provide a framework so you can start talking about hope with other people and practice these skills together, because we are better with hope. Please feel free to check out theshinehopecompany.com, where we list all of our resources around how to hope. We have a lot of free programs for how to hope, including the 5-day challenge, our hope infographic with a lot of skills that showcase how to hope, and articles of how to incorporate hope into your life. We have the Hope Beat Weekly, which is a weekly newsletter that shares strategies for hope. We have a My Hope Story template, so you can write your own hope story today. Also, My Hope Hero, so we can share what our heroes are doing to activate hope in their lives. And this is especially good with youth, so they can start looking up to people that have overcome similar challenges to them and seeing how these heroes use the Shine Hope framework. We have a Hopeful Minds for Teens program, a Hopeful Minds overview, educator guides. We have a new evidence-based college course, so you can activate hope on the college campus. There are programs in the workplace, overview courses, 90-minute courses for learning the what, why, and how to hope. What I want you to know about hope is it's a skill. You've got to practice these skills to become hopeful. It's easy to fall into despair and helplessness when we deal with challenges in life, and it takes intentional work and practice to get to hope. And yet it is always possible. So no matter what life brings, keep shining hope. Thanks so much for listening in. Have an awesome day. And of course, I've got to add that this program is designed to assist you in learning about hope. It should not be used for medical advice, counseling, or other health-related services. I, Fred, the Shine Hope Company, and myself, Kathryn Goetzke, do not endorse or provide any medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. I am not a medical doctor. The information provided here should not be used for the diagnosis or treatment of any medical condition, and cannot be substituted for the advice of physicians, licensed professionals, or therapists who are familiar with your specific situation. Consult a licensed medical profession or call 911 if you are in need of immediate assistance. And be sure to know the crisis hotline, 988, if you are in need of support. Thanks a bunch for listening. Take good care of yourself and keep shining hope.